renaming the show Shit Show, actually, at some point in time. Dan and Jodah's Shit Show. Yeah, sure.
And just so you know, we're recording.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Sensational Podcast. I am Jodah Jensen. I'm one of your hosts for the show, and I am also able to say that I have a co-host here who is...
I'm Dan Tarker. I'm one of the co-hosts for the Sense and Signal podcast, and I come from the field of higher education, which is the lens I'm going to bring to this conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And you know what? We are joined here today with Jennie Blumenthal. And thank you, Jennie, for joining us. She is the CEO and founder of Corporate Rehab, and is also the author of, I believe, the same title, Corporate Rehab. And today we're going to kind of embark and kind of understand about the concepts of this book and what you want to talk about. And I want to thank you for joining us. But before we get going, I just want to remind everybody, if you do enjoy this show, please click a like out there and maybe even consider subscribing to us.
No one.
I know we got to keep on saying, let's be diligent. Or don't walk away. Just walk away. Don't even bother. So,
well, speaking of walking away, here's my question, Jennie. You did the thing I think we all dream of doing. You walked into your boss's office and said, "I quit." And how did that make you feel?
Yeah, great question to start us off. And thank you guys for having me today. So I quit right in the middle of the pandemic, probably the first wave of the Great Resignation back in mid-2020. And the context is I was an executive in corporate America for 20 years. At the time, I was leading a $300 million business unit, managing 250 people for a global consulting firm, and had two kids trying to do elementary school fourth grade math at the kitchen table in a pandemic, and a husband trying to, go back to work in his own office. And so we kind of got to a point where we said, this isn't working and something's got to give. And it gave me a chance to really, look inside and say, I actually haven't been happy for a little while now. And I've been trying to be happy, but I'm actually pretty burned out. And so when I finally walked into the office, we were sequestered at home. So it was a phone call, but it felt scary. It felt really scary to have to go in and say, I don't know what I'm doing next, but I just know it's not this. And so that's really what I said. And then the rest kind of unfolded from there.
And a lot of people have had this experience through the pandemic. Now, not everyone wrote a book about it like you did, but a lot of people have had that experience through the pandemic. What do you think of what do you think it was about, the COVID pandemic that led people to make this choice or have this revelation?
Yeah, I think it was the fact that we actually got a chance to stop. So I was on planes 3 times a week leading up to this. The kids were really active. We had a busy social life. So if I wasn't hustling at my job, I was hustling on the soccer sidelines or in the neighborhood. And so COVID really just shut all of that down. There were no distractions. There was this sense of your own mortality as we saw death tolls mount on headlines. Unfortunately, our neighbor actually dropped dead about a month into the shutdown. And on a walk with my daughter, I walked past his car and saw just the front seat was strewn with his papers that he had thrown down, the last day that he wound up working, and a half-drunk water bottle as he, wound up going into the hospital later that day and not coming back. And it was kind of a wake-up call for me that not only do we have no distractions, but wow, I could be gone in a minute, and any of us could. And am I happy with the trade-offs that I'm making right now or the life that I'm living? And the answer was no. And so that's really all the clarity I had at that point, is that I no longer want to stay on this path. But really what led me to then figuring out what was coming next was why I stayed so long in some of the situations that weren't good for me. How much of that was me? How much of it was the scenarios that I was exposed to? And pulling that thread is really what led me to research the book, and then found a leadership company that focuses on how we get stuck in these situations and how to thrive in leadership.
That's interesting. Before we go much further down this path, I'm wondering if you also might be able to give us a little insight into who you are before the COVID happened. Like, what was your life like? And we kind of briefly, how did you get here? Because not everybody would respond to the signals that you got in the way that you responded, right? So I'm assuming your life sort of informed you. How did that? Who are you?
So I'll go all the way back. So I was raised on a farm in Virginia. My parents are both school teachers, and I have an identical twin sister. And so the four of us were pretty tight. Learned the value of hard work early on. My grandmother was a huge influence in my life. And was one of 10 children in the middle of the Depression. So the whole concept of you work really hard so that you can provide for your family and for your children and leave the next generation better off than you found it was really instilled to me. And I went to school, met my husband in college. He is in the medical field, so he got on his medical track and climbing that ladder. I got on my business ladder and started climbing that one. We've got 2 kids, as I mentioned, who are in elementary school. And we kind of were just going in this, like, you do what you got to do, I'll do what I got to do. And, and we're trying to cross paths without, missing too much of a beat. But I think for me, that hustle that was built into me from a young child served me really well in my career in terms of financial security, of getting the next job. And I really believed that the control over my time and the meaning that I'd find in work was just around the corner. If I could figure out and discover the 25th hour in the day and maximize efficiency, then there I'd be able to get off plane so much. If I could just sell this deal, then I'd meet my number and I could be home more. If I could just get one more project in that would set up next year so I wouldn't have to hustle so hard. And I bought in, to the belief that if I just do a little more, I'll get some of that control back. And I think to some extent that works in limited capacities. I think what I discovered was, and as I researched the book, the hustle culture really just asks for more. That hoop gets, they ask you to jump through two hoops, or that pole gets even higher to have to jump over. And so I found all of the things that made me really successful also became a bit of a trap where it was really hard to then get out. I looked behind me and realized I was the only woman on my business units team. I actually tell a story in my book about being at a business dinner with global leaders, and there were 100 of us in the room. And I turned around as we were all getting ready to sit down, and I realized for the first time I was the only woman in the room. And so those scenarios made me think, okay, well, I can't leave now because I've got to be a good example for everybody who's coming behind me. And I can't be the one who couldn't hack it. I'm the only one here to represent others.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is. Yeah. It is. Mm-hmm. And some of that self-induced, right? That we think we've got to save everybody else, or
I think that's called like stereotype threat too, right?
Yeah,
the terminology.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, and I think you're right. There's that. Earlier in my career, it was, well, I've got to come back from maternity leave because the other guys would say, oh, you're about to leave on maternity leave. We'll never see you again. I'll show them and I'll come back, And then to your point, as it gets higher and higher, you get to a point where you don't want to get mommy tracked, or you don't want to be the person who couldn't hack it. And often you don't stop to think, well, what am I trying to prove to them or myself versus do I even want to be in this environment? So I kind of think that maybe gives you a little bit of the sense that success almost became my enemy to some extent, because it was really reward. All of my efforts to hustle just got me, more further up the ladder. I have a friend who says she was the best at the donut eating contest, and it took her a long time to realize that the prize for eating the most donuts was more donuts. I think that's a really good example of what I found.
Speaking of the donut issue, right? I mean, because they serve a lot of donuts at Alcoholics Anonymous, I understand. And you, that was a segue, right? Yes. And you described this.
Well, I don't know what kind of segue, but all right.
Your propensity to hustle as an addiction, right? And is it the same kind of addiction as someone might experience with a drug or alcohol abuse or other types of addiction? Or is there any difference between the hustle addiction and other types of addictions we might think about?
I think it's actually really similar. And I think if you think about it as the hustle culture is something that, is somewhat American, right? But is within our society. It can be amplified in the homes that we are raised in or that we're running. It could be amplified in certain cultures. You could be in certain environments of a city or a certain community where, if you don't get your kid on this sports team, you miss the sign up. I mean, there's all kinds of ways, right, that we can kind of keep that reinforced. And I think it becomes this addiction of always on, everything has to be productive. You better go, because if you don't get on this list, then someone else is going to get a spot. And it winds up being this broad umbrella for all of these other things that kind of keep us hooked in ways that aren't that useful. So, for example, you mentioned the alcohol. That's a substance that people, become addicted to because I believe there's some underlying pain or something that they're either trying to run from or numb from, or it's taking the place of something in their life. And I think the hustle culture serves that just as well. Often the drug substance that gets inserted when you're addicted to the hustle culture is work. You become this workaholic, and people would say, well, why are you just addicted to work? Or what is it about work? It's not the work, just like it's not, in my belief, it's not the drugs, it's not the alcohol. It's the underlying dysregulation that you have in your own body that makes you search for something outside of yourself that's either going to take away that pain or make that emptiness or loneliness go away. And so for some people, that's numbing, and it could just as easily be alcohol or Netflix and numbing, where we're binge watching something, or social media scrolling.
It's both for me.
Right.
Sometimes Disney Plus and a bottle of wine.
It's some of our addictions are more socially accepted than others, right? But I think it has the same effects, that it's fulfilling this actual human need that becomes almost like a fake substitute for connection or belonging or security. And it keeps us hustling a lot of times after things that aren't as good for us, as opposed to pursuing true connection and true purpose.
Jennie, as you everything you said resonates with, like, literally you kind of described my reality, and Dan kind of joked about it as well to some degree. But how much of this is played in, how much of this can be lensed by an age factor as well? Because I wonder, in my 20s, my pathologies are different than my pathologies when I'm 50, right? And that's when you're young, you're vigorous, and you are out to take on the world, and you're poised to take it on, And so I'm totally willing to go gung ho, work those 80 hours, because I'm kind of enjoying myself. Right. I'm not feeling these pressures. Mm-hmm. I don't feel the sacrifices. Right. And if there are sacrifices or not sacrifices, I don't know. I'm not saying that, but I'm not feeling the sacrifices, or I'm willing to sacrifice. I'm not having any meaningful relationships. That's okay. Right. I'm not calling my mom and dad as much as I used to. That's okay.
Right.
And then at some point, for most of us, that flips. Mm-hmm. I think. Mm-hmm. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many ways we could break that down. I mean, I think the first thing is hustle in and of itself is not a bad thing, right? We all need to hustle, whether it's to get that job, whether it's to prove ourselves in, when we're 22 in our first role, whether it's to get kids out the door with shoes on their feet. All of those things require actual hustle, right? The problem is when we're in the hustle culture and living our lives that way, we stay there and we're not able to come back down. There is no, a roller coaster where there's highs and lows, or the gears of a car where you're accelerating and then backing off. You're just accelerating all of the time. And I think the challenge with that is it starts this dysregulation in our body where we become addicted to the stress hormone. That's really what's underlying a lot of this. And so I think the whole point of it is it's not bad in and of itself to be hustling, but the challenge is trying to make those intentional trade-offs and being conscious about them. Like you mentioned, if you're okay saying, I'm going to work 80 hours a week because I need to save up these next 3 years and go to grad school or buy a car or whatever it is, that's an intentional trade-off that you're making. And you're aware of those other things that you're not doing with your time. And you're saying, yeah, I know I'm doing that and I'm aware of it. I think the challenge is that about 95% of our actions actually come from unconscious thoughts. And that's really what we're trying to do is kind of catch ourselves in that unconscious and bring it into in the subconscious and bring it into the conscious, so that you're not making these decisions from a really old place that you're not aware of. And I think that the challenge that you mentioned that's so on point, especially with kids home from holidays and having, interactions with extended relatives, when you start out at that 22 and you say, oh, I'm making this great trade-off now, the reality is you're actually informed by all the subconscious patterns that have come before you. And most of that, those patterns that dictate your view on the world are actually set by first grade. So by the time you're 7, you've already learned what's safe in the world, what isn't, what parts of you get rewarded from your dad and your mom versus what parts of you, boy, I better hide this. I get a pat on the head and I get ice cream for that A and my performance. But the minute I start to cry when I miss that shot in T-ball, I get told to toughen up. So I better park that part of me away because it does not get the ice cream. And so that's running in the background of your mind, right? And that it's not that you're 22 and saying I need an ice cream party, but there might be part of you that says, boy, I really want the validation that comes with doing a good job and getting that promotion. So I'll choose the career path that's going to give me that same result. And so what happens is when we start at 22 in that scenario, and I saw this actually with a couple of younger people that I'm close to, we start automatically in these new workplaces and we immediately drop our boundaries. Okay, we'll start to work 80 hours a week. Then if you try to, at 35, suddenly invent boundaries for the first time, it's really hard versus...
Especially if people in your organization are used to you not having boundaries.
Exactly right. Yeah. And you're not used to it either. Like if you're working, 6 days a week, suddenly a 40-hour work week sounds like a part-time job. So
yeah.
Right. That
I could feel that. Our previous episode was titled Bad Storytelling is Destroying the World. And a lot of what you're talking about is storytelling too in your book. And it's the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. It's the stories that we tell each other about our organizations and our world. How much does storytelling feed into this hustle culture or the toxic hustle culture that you're talking about?
Yeah, it's a huge part of it because to your point, Dan, it's whose stories are we running our lives on, right? Is it a story that you've created that you believe in, or is it a story that's been handed down to you? If I just take my grandmother and even my parents, who I have immediate respect for, when I think about the story that they told me, it was financial success is the way to actually make your next generation more stable, right? I now believe that's one dimension, right? But if you think about what are the other ways that you can leave the world a better place, there's a million other things you can do. You can go solve world poverty. You can give out sandwiches in your local community and pursue financial security. And when you think about it, it's really just connected to Maslow's hierarchy of needs that take care of that survival stuff. Then that frees you up for connection and purpose and esteem. And so it's up to each of us as individuals to decide what we want to fill our lives with on that continuum. But if you're running on old stories that tell you financial security is the way to make sure you're taking care of people, you might suboptimize some of your decisions and put revenue or financial security a little higher on that order of needs than it really needs to be. Look, food insecurity and inflation are real things, right? But I coach a lot and I talk to people every day that say, well, I've got to be able to feed my family, and they're making, high 6 figures. They can feed their family. That's not actually what's keeping them in the job. It's an old story of, who am I if I don't have this big title? Or who am I if I'm not the fill in the blank, type of role? And it's being conscious or being aware of what those stories are and how much weight we're giving them.
So I was watching Bill Maher the other day, and he had a guest on about a month ago, and I can't remember his name. If I can recall it. Interesting character, and he was definitely a boomer, but he was very anti-boomer. Mm-hmm. And I think Dan might know who I'm talking about. I can't remember his name though.
Ageism in this show.
yeah. Well, but I'm saying he was definitely anti-boomer. He was, and he's written a couple books, and his thesis was that his story was that the world as we have it is structured in a way that satisfies baby boomers' needs, mm-hmm. and that anybody who's not a baby boomer is basically effed, essentially, was his thesis. Mm-hmm. And he argued, look, you can complain, but you gotta hustle. He gets like, you need to work your butt off. If you're 20 years old and you're not hustling, you're going to be left out of this new world. He goes, you'll have time to relax when you're my age, 50. Basically, that's what he's saying. It's pretty crazy. But is that tough love truth? Is that a story that he's creating that doesn't exist, or is it his story? Where's the balance? Where do you think that relationship of the world that is today? Because what I'm hearing you is that there's a model out there, and maybe that model needs to be changed. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I do think the model definitely needs to be changed. And I don't think that it's only a boomer thing. So I should clarify that this is not an ageist comment that I'm intending to make. I think that the age and stage that we're in has a lot to do, right, with what our needs are, right? Whether you're a caregiver, whether you don't have any attachments, whether you're retirement age and you're looking at not wealth creation, but preservation, all of those things are going to influence, right, what we prioritize. Mm-hmm. But the cohorts of those generations have a huge influence too. So my grandmother, who grew up in the Depression, could no further imagine thriving than I could go into a war zone and tell somebody, stop being shot at. Here's a paint palette. Just go start painting. It would be completely crazy to her because her whole life was about survival. So the thought that she could have instilled in me, here, make sure you balance art and life and humanity along with surviving, would have been really hard. She wouldn't have had the context for doing that. She then raised the next generation with what she knew was get out there and hustle and try to do as much as you can, right? And I think about my parents as baby boomers. I think about me as a Gen Xer and what values I'm raising my kids with. I think there's a huge element of the cohort that is making up the leadership teams of the C-suites of America or academia that has a big impact on what they value, right? They don't know a world where you can sit back and not hustle, and that hustling in a lot of people's minds means I won't ever have to feel vulnerable. If I have enough money, it can protect my family, and I don't have to worry if something happens to them. Which I think is a fallacy, but that's a big value statement that a lot of people were raised with. So I think it absolutely needs to change. I think that we've got the first cohort of 4 generations in the workforce in a long time, and there's a lot of value that can be created from what about the political capital that boomers could be giving to Gen Zers with different perspectives, and not just saying, oh, you're too young, you don't understand. Gen Zers are actually raised with a completely different compass when it comes to meaning in work and what's value and what's the role of a corporation. What kinds of things could we create if we're actually able to reach across and learn from different generations, I think is huge. So I don't agree with Bill Maher's guess that you just need to hustle. And unfortunately, we've seen that story too often, right? I think about my neighbor who he hustled and one day he was gone and that was it. He didn't get to relax, at this person's age. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think there's room for different paths, or look, maybe there's room for whoever wants to stay on that track and go straight up and prioritize financial security. Here's that path. For others that want something in between, here's what those look like. But I think right now it's a one size fits all model that doesn't work for everybody.
Yeah. Before, one last thought on that. And I'm thinking, I've had several incidents with my life with where I need to go hospitalized, mm-hmm. and I think I totally agree with what you just said. And I've had that sensation all my life, and I think near death experience. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is so cliche, but the fact that I was close to not making it in my early 20s, that informed me of I'm working really hard right now. It was for something way down the line, and I'm not breathing for the moment. Right. And of course, it opened the doors for all sorts of meditative, mm-hmm. contemplative thinking and books. And after that, and it was almost like everybody should have a near-death experience so they understand how fleeting at some point, so they can smell the roses. I don't know, just an anecdote that resonates with what you said.
No, I think death is. We've done a whole episode on death and how it influences how we construct meaning and purpose, especially in the workplace. Yeah,
right. And it's to your point, it's not saying that, it needs to be one or the other either, right? I'm not spending my days smelling the roses every day and it's not full of, rainbows and ponies. There's a lot of hard work that's going into it, and there's a lot of frustration too, but at least I'm being more conscious of what that balance is, as opposed to there's one way to the top. This is the only way to do it. You either hack it or you can't hack it. I just think there's a lot more options out there, and I'm excited to see about the future of work, what we wind up creating.
Yeah, I want to definitely, toward the end of this episode, I want to get back to what the future looks like, especially as we start to exit mm-hmm. The pandemic. But I did want to touch on a couple other things before we get there. And one, I want to make a point, really appreciate what you said about the intergenerational aspects of the workplace, working in higher ed, definitely seeing that and seeing the potential for conflict there, and also the potential for growth. and innovation that can happen through that intergenerational mingling if we create the right environment for it. But I want to get to your framework, because your framework it seems to be designed to address this hustle culture issue, and it's called
the Rehab framework?
Rehab. Sorry, I have it listed here. Yeah, it is Rehab, right? You're asking us all to go into rehab.
Yes,
and so
exactly.
What is that Rehab framework?
Yeah. So, and the reason I called it Corporate Rehab is when I left, people were like, you were poised to take this next big job. Like, what happened? And I joked that I'm putting myself through corporate rehab because I was trying to detox from my own addiction to the hustle culture. And that's kind of what came from this as I first started giving away my perspectives to people who said, I feel burned out too. What should I do? And I originally tried to just send them the list of the 50 books that I was reading, and it was too overwhelming. So I really distilled it down into this framework of both readings and podcasts and exercises, because I do some coaching as well. So Rehab stands for recognize your story, is the R, and that's really getting context for your life choices and the values that you have. E is evaluate. So that's actually looking into your patterns and your relationships and what's working for you, what's not. And H is heal across mind, body, and spirit. So all different ways that you can kind of restore if you've been burned out, or do some healing if there's other things that you need to recover from. And then A is arise, where you're actually getting to grow and play and add the fun things back when we're not hustling so much for our worth outside of ourselves. And B is build. And that's really where you get to actually build a roadmap of all the changes you want to make, so that you're not pushing yourself to do too much too soon, and getting the right support around you for some of the shifts that you want to make, whether you stay in corporate America or whether you go out on your own.
Yeah, it seems like it's kind of it's designed around transformation, right? The kind of almost the destruction of the self and the rebuilding of the self into something new.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so much of it, I'm glad you said that with self, because so much of this addiction to the hustle culture comes from your identity, right? That if you see yourself as someone who's working so hard, or someone who has this status, or someone who has this title, and that's so interwoven with the way that you show up in the world, if you want to make a change, it's really hard to pivot. Just look at anybody who's been worked so long and then retires, and in their retirement is rudderless and doesn't know what to do. It's because so much of their identity is in that work persona. And so what we're doing is just bringing that back about, 10 to 20 years and saying, do that work as you go, so that you can wind up being intentional about these different, these different parts of your identity that you want to have moving through the world.
Yeah.
And all this is painless, right? You can do it and you can expect no issues moving forward.
Crazy. Yeah, exactly.
just it's interesting too, because as I look at it and I see, and this is awesome. I always love, what do they call acronyms or anagrams, or
right.
Help me out here, folks.
Acronym.
It reminds me, because I am from the product development side of a tool which you might have heard of called design thinking.
Yes.
And this is almost a design thinking process.
Yes.
I mean, I can almost map this.
Yes.
And it's like a rigorous approach of reevaluating your purpose. And I love it. I mean, it's very cool. Was that informed at all? Did that inform you at all?
Yeah, I did actually. So one of the books that I read was Design Your Life. So I know that the work that those two professors have done, really with college students, but I did design thinking in my old job as we tried to do digital transformation and rethink product development. Yeah. That was definitely a piece of it. The neuroscience of leadership, any of the attachment theory. Like, I tried to really get from org dev, psychology, product development, business, because I think at the end of the day, I want people to stay in a leadership position wherever they choose to plant their feet, and do it in a way that actually is revenue generating, but is just balanced a little bit more. So I did take from that. You could probably take, instead of the customer being at the center of the design thinking process, you put yourself or your identity at the center and redesign around that. So yeah, good call out.
I love that. Can we pivot, Dan? Because there's an elephant in the room that we haven't spoken about, which no one else knows except for the three of us to some degree. The book is in general, anybody can read, but you were really trying to help women in this world on one level as well. And I'd like to, if we can address that a little bit. I have, obviously I relate to everything you just said. The hustle, being coerced to stay over way longer because they had free beer, the whole thing. It's all there. But how does it affect women differently?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I like to think that the way I wrote it, the process that I go through is the exact same. To your point, anybody can go put themselves through rehab, the steps, the exercises, all of it. I chose to weave women's stories into it and speak about women's identities and the way women show up in the world. Because, first of all, I wrote the book for the version of me from 10 years ago who knew something was off with her life and knew I wasn't actually meant to do this, but I didn't know what else to do. So I'll just stay on this road as long as I can. And once there's a big billboard that is bright, shining, saying "go this way," then I'll take that detour. It never showed up. Actually, I had to actually step off the road before I figured that part out. But I really wrote it with that in mind. And I think for me, there were so many things that were so specific to the way that just gender, men and women show up in the world, from conditioning, from their own limiting self-beliefs, from things that get put upon them, that I felt it would really water it down if I tried to tell too many stories that were from just a male and female perspective. And then once you add race in there and you add, sexual orientation or any other of these intersectionalities, it started to become something where I didn't feel like I could give the weight to the story if I tried to make sure that everybody was represented. So that's really why I chose the female perspective. And, look, a lot of this is around burnout, and women are, bear the brunt of that right now. So it probably for a long time, but particularly right now. So I felt like it would water it down too much if I didn't call out what needed to change. And if I had to think about being a writer and write what I don't know what it's like to be a white man. You guys could write that book. I couldn't write that one. So I didn't feel like qualified to be able to say, this is what it's like to move through the world. But I think there probably could be, even other stories I would have included. And frankly, most of my responses and DMs that I get are from men saying, I can't like your post, but I feel the same way. My boss is going,
they can't like your post?
Oh yeah, I get that all the time. My boss will frown on me if I like something that says corporate America needs to change, but you're totally right. Please keep writing this. A lot of the posts I do around like psychological safety and having trust in organizations. And so I'll tell real stories and people will say, I really wanted to like that, but I couldn't. So I'll send you a direct message instead. So to your point, I think guys, even more to men in some cases. My husband and I talk about this a lot, that there's, we do a disservice to women in this country of asking them to do all this unpaid labor, and really not having these multiple career paths. I think influences women from a caregiving and a birthing perspective, because there's certain things that they're only qualified to do from a family raising or a family birthing perspective. But for men too, we put all of this pressure on men to have to be the breadwinner, to have to do the solid job, to have to be the one to take care of the rest of the family, to have to be strong, to not show weakness. All of these things, I think, actually create leadership styles that aren't so great for men either. So I think it really goes both ways, but that's the reason I chose to focus on women in this book.
So real quick anecdote story again, I've got a bunch of bad ones. Years ago, I play piano, and I've been playing all my life. And one time I was about to play piano at a house, and I was going to sit down, and there was a party, and the guest's dad came up to me. He was probably in his 70s, and I played, and I played pretty good, and I was playing some jazz, and it was done. Dad came up to me. He said, "Hey," he was like, "Wow, you play good." And I go, "Yeah." He goes, and he said this with a straight face. He said, I didn't expect you to be a piano player. I'm like, well, what does that mean, right? And he goes, yeah, I would have thought like more like a football player or something, because I'm kind of a biggish guy. And I just thought, and so he saw this affordance, right, in what he saw. Right. And so I'm going to make a blanket statement, and I want to get your response on this, that the differences between men and women in the corporate culture are far less significant than the differences that we impose upon them.
Yes, I think that's very true. I think structurally, there's so much about the way corporate America was set up in 1950 when labor dynamics were so different that we haven't really changed, that also makes that even harder. So to your point, humans are humans. And if you strip out some of that conditioning, I think that there's not that much different about men and women. But I also think if we were to say, women are going to be on this path to the C-suite, men, you figure out how to go, have a baby, go take care of said baby. When your mother gets sick, you're the one who's, putting her in the nursing home or finding care. Oh, and by the way, we're going to start around the time you're about 49. We're going to say it's time to put you out to pasture. But women, you can stay working till 75. I think if work were structured that way, we'd see the same thing from men saying, hey, this doesn't really work for me. It's just the fact that we happen to have put women in that role in our society. I don't think that structurally there's really that much difference. It's really the way that we've decided to set up a system. And look, I think there's I'm sure there's bad actors out there. I'm not naive enough to say that there's not. But I think there's also just, hey, we built the workforce for the people who were in it when we built it, and we haven't seen a need to change it. I think if men were the ones who were having babies, we would have had a national caregiving policy as of 1932.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, I don't see it. My wife's home. She seems real happy.
That's right.
We're good, And so I think there's a lot of that just like I couldn't understand what it's like to be a Black woman in the United States. So how could I possibly know and say, hey, we need to absolutely make this change? It's the same, obviously with different scenarios, but it's similar. You've got to be able to step into someone else's shoe and say, even if this has no benefit for me personally, I need to do this because it's the right thing to do to make the boats rise for everyone.
So lots of stuff here. And you obviously did a lot of research to collect all this information. I'm kind of fascinated about your writing process. How did it start? How did you start working on this book? And let's start there. How did you get started writing the book? And then we'll have some follow-up questions about your process.
So the process actually starts with what Jodah said a couple of minutes ago. It starts with the pain. It starts with trying to make sense of the pain that I was going through. And I tried so many things in that arise phase right away to say, like, okay, now that I'm not working so much, like, let me just throw myself into different things to try to understand what I went through. And one of them was a poetry writing class
nice.
that I took, which was amazing, with this guy out of LA who was fantastic. And I was really shocked at the things that came out of me when I could put myself in that state where he would kind of make you do a bit of a meditation and start writing. And I was shocked at how healing it was, just to get things out of me that I didn't even know were there. Phrasing, ways that I was burned out, or things from, having my babies and how hard that was. And I just kind of packed away because it wasn't useful to dwell on it. So let's keep going. And when I actually took the time to unpack it, I was shocked at how much putting words on a page was really healing. And so I started journaling every morning about what was coming up for me and what I was thinking about. And then as more and more women started reaching out and saying, tell me, your tips, give me your, cheat sheet on what you're learning. And I was really honest and vulnerable about, like, hey, here's what I'm finding out. Here's what I wish I would have done differently. That's really where the book came from. I never intended to write one. I just started writing. And as I started to organize it and started to share insights with other people, I realized, being a good little consultant, that I had to kind of package it somehow because it was just too overwhelming. And that's what gave me that the putting it into the format of the rehab framework that I walk everybody through in the book. And then the stories, I was going to put my own stories in there, and I did, but I wound up having a lot of women reaching out and saying, oh my gosh, me too. That story you read about burnout, I felt like that. You've got to hear this story. And so I let people start booking time with me to kind of capture their stories.
Interesting. And so were you posting things on social media? Like, as you were writing your book, you were posting stories and people were responding and saying, oh, this resonates with me. Can we talk more?
Definitely. That's exactly how it happened. So I took a writing class through Georgetown University, a guy who started this Creators Institute where he started teaching students to write a book in a semester. And then he's opened it up to the public. And I was really intrigued because I was thinking, well, I'm not going to make this a huge book. I'm just, this will be fun to just do it for a class and get my thoughts on paper and kind of make sense of it. And they really, pushed you to declare on social media you were writing a book. And of course, I was like, no, I'm going to make it perfect. And as soon as I know everything, then I'll, gift it to the world. And he's like, nope, that's not how you do it. You got to build this community and start testing concepts. And I found that to be really
interesting.
Yeah. So I started putting stuff on LinkedIn and that's where I
very agile, right?
Yes, it is. Exactly. You're really right. I hadn't made that connection yet, Jodah. I'll have to write something about that. That's interesting. But it's exactly
agile
right.
through writing, or writing through agile.
So, yeah, I'm getting real customer focus group feedback, not even having to go through MVP. I mean, it was a really fully dynamic process.
And so for our audience, what is MVP?
the minimum viable product. So when you're testing in software design and product design, you're doing a design sprint of writing or building for 6 weeks and then showcasing something and then getting feedback and keeping and going. So it's a good call out. That was kind of the way I did the book, is just, I kept writing and then capturing. And then as I got these 300 stories, I really included those quotes because I really felt like it let other people be seen. If they didn't resonate with my story, then there's, 299 other women's stories that you can, pick through and see if one of those kind of strikes you a little bit more authentically.
Yeah, and you draw on a lot of different theories to kind of help us make sense of the stories that you collect in your own personal story. You talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and some other theories. Did you come to the book with those theories in mind, or did they kind of just emerge as you started gathering the data from folks and sought out theories to kind of make sense of it?
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of art imitating life to some extent as part of my own process. I mean, the way I got to the rehab framework was through my own trial and error of what did I need to understand? And really when I first left and started to try to start writing about what I had been through, I actually went to therapy for the first time in my life. I had never been until I was 42. And so learning those concepts there, but then also, realizing the limitations of talk therapy and saying, okay, well, they're going to kind of facilitate the discussion, but I need to understand attachment theory and trauma and intergenerational trauma and understanding, what motivates people, the neuroscience of leadership. If I'm talking to people in the business world, where does the mind and the body connect when we actually talk about our actions, and what would leaders do if they were more embodied in terms of those conscious actions? So all of that, I really felt like I started to get more interested in as a person. And then that just kind of led itself to finding its way into the book based on the things that resonated the most with me, or the places where I thought were the biggest blind spots. Things like trauma is a great example. I always thought that was kind of reserved for people coming back from war or, witnessing a car accident. And I didn't realize that there's actually 80% of adults have had some sort of trauma in their lives. And the way it's defined is actually your reaction to a particular situation. So it could be one of the greatest examples I found was Gabor Mate talks a lot about trauma. And he talks about how if you're a child and you are, get stuck in a closet, and the handle won't, open and it's dark, you might be completely terrified. But if you're a 15-year-old and you get stuck in the closet, you can rationalize with yourself that, oh yeah, shoot, this is stuck and I'll get out in a second. Those two events, the 15-year-old won't even remember it the next day. The 3-year-old might, be completely traumatized.
Nightmares about it years later, right?
Exactly. Every time he gets in an elevator, he's like, why do I hate this? So I thought that was really interesting, because when you bring that forward to the workplace, I heard person after person say, well, I always started to work for these bosses who were just made me prove myself. Or I always wound up working in these companies where I was only as good as my last deal. And as we started to talk more about it, they would relate that back to the way their family was, or the way their first year, cutthroat, job was. And it really influenced the way that they, chose either a career or, had patterns come throughout. So I thought that one was an interesting one to pull through, because so many people don't know about it. It's not something that I think we do a great job at in this country in terms of teaching kids about emotional, mental, and social health.
No, it's stigmatized, right? And we know a lot of people, especially for men, go back to gender, for men, I think the whole idea of help seeking, or the research on help seeking, came out of men not seeking help through counseling and psychology.
I practice just pushing that really deep down, real hard in my stomach, so that I can come up with some diseases later on in life. That's my goal.
You're doing a good job, Jodah.
Ignoring. I'll just tuck those all away.
It's over here someplace. I don't even know what. I don't even want to look anymore. I'm scared.
I drowned mine in a wine bottle.
No, it's agreed. But I do feel that it's becoming less stigmatized. in a weird,
getting back to intergenerational, I think among Gen Z, it's much less stigmatized.
That's true.
it's much less stigmatized. And I'll say for the wrong reasons, but this is one good outcome, from my personal opinion, the over prescriptions of these drugs that I don't think are being leveraged in the way they probably should be, but that's a whole other discussion. But it has sort of opened that, hey, I'm taking this and I'm seeing, it seems to have opened this door of discussion of therapy more, that people, it's accepting. I mean, people just say, yeah, I'm on this thing. I'm like, oh man, that would have been hidden 10 years ago if no one would have just openly said, I'm on this drug, and that seems to also sort of open the door to talk about mental illness or mental, so there's,
I think that's true.
It does.
It definitely has gotten, the destigmatization, I think, is a huge benefit. I think the next hurdle I'd like to see us cross is the economic inequity related to it too, because it's still super expensive. So it's the kind of thing where even if you're brave enough to do it, then trying to afford that, on top of everything, I think is a challenge too. So hopefully we'll fix both of that when we get all the generations together and fix the future of work. They can also fix the future of mental health.
It's crazy how many therapists, psychologists, mental health doctors, how many don't take insurance, and how many insurances don't do. It's a tragedy.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I'll say from a higher ed perspective, I mean, we know now we see more students than ever needing mental health support. I know at the school I work at, we're expanding our counseling department. Some of that's coming out of COVID, but it was actually there before COVID, the increasing need for mental health support in the schools. So, and part of that might be it's always been there. It's just, once again, that destigmatization has allowed people to talk more openly about what they're going through and the traumas that they've experienced.
Yeah, that's a good silver lining.
That is a silver lining. So thriving, the ultimate goal of your book is to help not only people, but organizations thrive. So in a dream, let's imagine, what does a utopian thriving organization look like to you?
Yeah, well, I actually wrote the end of the book to address this because I think that there's a lot that we could do. I think the first thing I'll say is all of what I'm offering out there, I don't think it's a revolution. I'm not saying burn it all down and let's start over. It's really more of an evolution of who we are as humans, of kind of moving up that Maslow's hierarchy and getting to more purpose-driven organizations, getting to a place where we're seeking true connection and not going for the quick fixes. And getting to the esteem that we feel, not as much connected to our titles, but more about the problems that we're solving in the world. So I think if we think about it from that lens, and it might help disarm anybody who's listening who says, yeah, this all sounds great, but we still have to make money. We do have to make money, right? Everybody still has jobs that they still need to, to go after, right? But I wrote kind of a quick framework for people who are looking to thrive of what to include in their cultures. And it matches the word thrive just to keep it easy for everyone.
Oh, nice.
The first one is for the T stands for trust. I think that's the foundation. We talked about psychological safety, which is the ability to just speak up without being penalized. Trust without having, constant compliance is a huge piece of that, because without that, people can't feel free to bring themselves to work fully or speak up if there's some challenge. The R actually stands for respect. That one I included because the research from Donald and Charlie Sull in the first phase of the Great Resignation found that the number one reason people left their jobs, yes, it was somewhat caregiving, but the number one reason people put down was respect, that they no longer felt respected at work, or they felt outright disrespect. In fact, it was by a factor of 10 to 1. So that just tells you something. Hey, let me give you more money. And, oh, you're just, trying to do this for a power grab, that they really felt that their culture was no longer supporting them. The I is for impact. That's moving us beyond the Industrial Revolution world of just outputs and treating people like robots and into this impact stage where we're not worried about whether you're in an office or how long you're sitting in that seat. We're really focused on a blend of the output metrics and the impact that you're making and what does that look like, which I think gives us a lot of room, Jodah, for some design thinking around what the future of work could look like and what that includes. The V is for values. So looking at the values that you have and making sure that yours match with the organization's and you're finding more meaning in the work that you're doing on a daily basis. And E is empathy, which I think we've all read about is becoming kind of the superpower for the next phase of work. And look, the cool thing I think about the Thrive model is that it's not a recipe that says you need to go get an MBA or you need to be on Wall Street or a billionaire. It's just a recipe for being human, just bringing your humanity into your leadership, as opposed to trying to sub-optimize who you are when you show up as a leader to command and control and feel like you need to dominate. It's really letting other dimensions of leadership in.
I'm going to proposition something here. Maybe someone's already said this. So I came of age during the information revolution, right? Before that, I believe it was considered industrial. I don't know what was before that. I think it was industrial revolution going into information. And then in the mid 2000s, it was, or somewhere along the line said, well, you know what? We're moving out of that. We're moving into, it's a service revolution. And then it says, you know what? We're moving out of that. It's an experience revolution. And maybe you're suggesting now industry should be an empathy revolution. And maybe that's what industries revolve around empathy somehow. I don't know what that means or how that means, but we can both agree, we can all agree that in some respects, the way corporations are aligned right now, businesses, it's not orthogonal to empathy. It's just regardless of empathy. Right. And if you happen to have them aligned, good for you. That's great. You have a good leader who happens to care, but they don't have to be. And maybe there's something we need to identify that's intrinsic between the two that makes them connected. Just a thought.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just thinking, in terms of this empathy thing, I had a conversation with somebody at work yesterday, actually. I won't go into the details of it, but she was talking about how at some workplaces she wasn't talking about our workplace, luckily, but at other places she's worked, people will just walk by her and not say hi to her, and she's a librarian, so she's standing there and she's visible, but the dean might walk through and not even say anything to her. And it makes me wonder, not everybody is good at empathy. I've had some toxic bosses who could have improved with some empathy, right? So is empathy something innate, or is there a way to help people grow their empathy, especially people in leadership positions who might not have that gift naturally?
Oh, God, such a great question. So I think a lot of it is innate. But I think that there are ways to grow it. I think part of it is actually recognizing when you are in either a toxic workplace or just a workplace that's like stuck on the hustle culture where productivity trumps everything else. Things like if you have a jerk high producer and that person gets, promoted and the response from the top brass is, well, yeah, we know he treats everybody like crap, but he's our best rainmaker. Okay, it's going to be really hard for that group and that C-suite to really develop empathy, because right there they're saying there's one thing that matters and the rest of the way that people, get treated doesn't matter quite so much. I think some of it is just normalizing emotions in the workplace. And what I mean by that is not, oh gosh, let's just make sure it's okay to cry. It's really more, is it safe to speak up, as we talked about with the psychological safety? And then if it is, how can you be honest with the people that you're surrounded by, that whatever they're doing, whether it's posturing, cutting someone off, stealing revenue or a deal or whatever it is, if there's honesty about that, then you can actually be put in the other person's shoes. I think when you don't have the psychological safety to speak up, and those bosses are allowed to continue to rule companies in a way where their actions they're never held accountable for them, and they're surrounded by yes people, that's where it's going to be really hard to develop empathy. So I think it kind of goes hand in hand, but it can be taught. Brene Brown has some great stuff in her book on Atlas at the Heart around this. And I do a lot of coaching around it as well, just in terms of how to look for that. And I think that's one area where when I talk about women in leadership, that tends to be a skill that women can more readily access. To your point, Jodah, that might be because they're conditioned that it's okay to access that, and men might be conditioned that it's not okay to access that. And then that's going to be a great experiment as we move forward. But I think everybody can learn the skill of empathy. You just have to be in an organization that allows you that pause to be able to stop and connect with the other person's experience.
Yeah, it sounds to me like getting back to that value in Thrive, it
Yeah.
sounds like empathy needs to be a value within the organization from the top down.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I think we're getting to a place, it's not going to be 10 years, maybe it'll be 25, 50, but we're going to get to a place real quick where the hard skills that we've valued so much in the workplace are going to be table stakes. And really what's going to set you apart as a leader is this empathy, is this ability to connect with others and create that connection at a scale, whether it's hybrid or not, that allows people to see that vision and move forward. I think, getting to a place where you're just the best financial, Excel jockey, okay, great. But if you're a jerk to be around, there's probably going to be, that role is going to be automated pretty soon, or there's going to be an AI program that can do what you can do. So what value as a human are you adding to that? So I'll be interested to see how that winds up changing the dynamics within work.
And I wonder, the discussion we're having thus far, if I'm understanding it correctly, is that empathy can be valued in an organization, and it should be, probably, I think, is what the room is saying. And that then from that perspective, then it becomes emergent. You value it, people take it on, and becomes an emergent behavior, which manifests into creating what would be qualified as an empathy organization. Mm-hmm. But I'd postulate that you can also actually institutionalize it.
Yeah.
Somehow too, and simple ones would be and this is so reductive. I'm almost don't even want to bring it up, but vacations. You have organizations that I think are unempathetic with their vacation time versus others. We know that letting people get time off and enjoying themselves, being with their family, is a empathetic thing.
Right.
And I think that you can create institutions that actually on paper say, this is an empathy thing. This is an empathy thing. This is an empathy thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think some of it can be from a policy perspective. Some of it can actually be at the team level of, for example, one great way of doing both empathy and connection that I do when I'm working with teams and leadership is actually helping team leaders help their teams uncover what's meaningful for that team or that team member, and creating some of the meaning in their job on a daily basis so that that person can connect what they're doing to the organization's mission or to what their role is. That's a great empathy builder, because it might mean that you walk into a team, hopefully you have a diverse team of engineers and strategists and all kinds of different practitioners. You can't possibly manage them all the exact same way in a way that taps into what's meaningful for each of them, but they can. And if you can set the table where they know they can tell you what's meaningful for them and you can build practices as a team, I think that's really the key for creating more of that empathy, as opposed to trying to make everybody fit that same model and mold. And when they don't meet it, we say, oh, you're not stacking up, or get with the program. So I think there's great tactics for that.
Fascinating. So we're coming to the end here. Are you thriving now? You've written this book. You're now on the speaking circuit and doing podcasts like ours. Do you feel like you're in a place where you're now thriving? And
yeah, I think that's going to be a long loss, or a lifelong thing for me. I think there's going to always be times where I'm feeling stuck in certain things. I do feel like now I'm lit up by more purposeful things for me. And I reserve the right as a human to continue to grow and have that purpose change. I hope it changes and evolves as I grow. But yeah, I think I'm actually thriving in the sense that I know exactly why I'm here. I'm bringing my skills, and in this moment, doing everything I can with the pain that I've been through, and making some meaning for it for others to help them. And for me, that's my highest and best use at this moment in time. And I'm doing it every day. So it doesn't even feel like work a lot of the time, even though it is a lot of work. It doesn't feel like it. So to me, that really is, I feel like I'm evolving and moving up that Maslow's hierarchy towards something that's much more purposeful.
I think we can make a distinction between work and labor, maybe. I don't know, right?
Good point, yeah.
Something is work, but isn't necessarily laborious. Right? Maybe, I don't know. Before we go, I want to poke the bear, and I want to have a controversial subject. So we all both know in recent weeks, Mr. Musk has taken over Twitter, and for good or bad or whatever, it's obviously controversial. But one of the things that he's doing is he's sort of laying down the law on people, like having to come into the office and you better be working 80 hours a week because it's going to be rough. And
what was the phrase you used? You have to work big time or
something like that, right? And he's saying, if you don't want to, I'll give you 6 months severance. Leave. What are your thoughts on that, based upon like our earlier conversations around work-life balance, or work equilibrium, as Brad Topliff in our previous episodes had suggested calling it?
I mean, I think he's going to win the battle, but I think he's going to lose the war. I think he's going to get the returns that Wall Street wants. I think for people that value one-dimensional leadership, he's a great role model. I have no respect for one-dimensional leadership. I saw way too many one-dimensional leaders who valued revenue or profit at the expense of everything else. And frankly, I think it's lazy. So I don't care for his hardcore tactics. I do think they will result in financial returns, but I think what you're squashing in all of that is all of this humanity that we've just talked about in this episode. Where's the innovation going to come from when you're working engineers 80 hours a day? Sure, they might automate or get code out faster that you've already thought of, but are you giving them time to get inspired and do something different? So, is he going to make progress on his innovation roadmap? Maybe, probably, but will it be as far advanced as it could have been if he actually was able to tap into the full humanity of those engineers? No, I don't think so. So I think it's disappointing. I think that it's fine for one person to decide that that's how he wants to lead his organization. The real disappointment for me has been the rest of the tech world saying, wow, he's really onto something with cost cutting. Give me a break. Like, I came from consulting. Consulting's a $330 billion business, and most of it's cost cutting. It's the oldest trick in the book. Like, anybody who's worth their salt could go into any organization and slash and burn and get those results. To me, that's not innovative. That's not new. I mean, really, it's the most basic style there is out there. Show me an executive who can go in and rally the troops and give them a leadership vision to realize and work appropriately as hard. I would guarantee you there'd be plenty of people saying, I'll give you 75 hours a week if I can get on a rocket ship that I can believe in. And they will give you those hours. You don't have to demand it from them. If you can just paint a picture of the future that actually has the humanity as part of it, I think that's where I'm really interested to see who emerges to the top of that stack. And it's not Elon.
Yeah. Jennie, you're speaking my truth on that one. I agree. And it's weird because I feel he started off that way although I don't know, the media tells you what they have their narratives, but I feel like he started off that way with like Tesla. Although when you read the book, when you read the books, I don't want to get into, I don't know. He had this vision and he powerhoused Tesla to become a monolith. And I think we can all agree it was a good thing, but something has happened where he's like gone this other path and he's kind of become this weird troll. It seems like, I don't know if it's a game he's playing or why he's doing it, but I totally agree with you. I think he's trying to appease.
I kind of sometimes think the whole Twitter thing is just a massive billionaire trolling the world.
It feels like it. It's weird. But like you said, Jennie, it plays well at the SECs. It plays well with stock markets. They resonate. They don't care where the money comes from. And an easy way is to cut costs. But, you could be cutting into the bone, and that then prohibits you from growing. Right. And so he might have long-term, like you said, long-term issues by doing this, but he'll get some immediate short-term issues possible.
Right.
Yep.
So where can people find what's next for you, and where can people find your book?
Well, as you said, I'm doing a lot of coaching and speaking, so that's been super fun. We're doing another leg of the book tour in the spring, so hitting a couple of cities, which I'll be looking forward to. And people can get the book on Amazon or my website, which has all of the information. It's www.corporate-rehab.com. So follow along and get your copy. It makes for some good gifts too.
Nice. Yeah, Christmas is right around the corner, and we all could use some corporate rehab. We could use some higher ed rehab. I might use it for that. Well, Jennie, thanks for being on the show. You've been a delightful guest, and I've definitely learned a lot from this conversation, so thank you for that.
Thank you, Jennie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. This was fun, guys.